So we have quite a motley crew for you today, all dressed as you'd expect. Actually, he's the one who works for a bank is dressed like a blockchain crypto kind of guy. Before we get started, how many of you in this room invest in cryptocurrencies? 1, 2, 3. How many of the 3 people put your hands up have made money? 2.
Don't answer that question. That's a security risk.
Security risk. You're not allowed to answer that question. Okay. Who in this room uses blockchain, has done a project on blockchain? Oh, the same guys. The same ones that made money, right. So you're going to have some questions later, right? Okay, so we've got here for you Liam, who works for a bank, so he's going to give the perspective of a bank. We've got John, who works for Kinetic, who helps companies go through ICOs. We've got Adrian, who is talking about tokens as a new asset class. We've got Juan, who is across all things blockchain, runs a company called NextChange and a community. And then we've got Zach, who comes from the dark side of blockchain and crypto. And he's here to give a difficult opinion on things. So I think we want to learn a little bit about blockchain, because in the beginning, you know, over the last year in Hong Kong, there's been a lot of talk all over the world about blockchain. So I'd like to know, maybe from yourself, Liam, what do you see the role of blockchain is? I mean, there's a lot of technology out there. What does blockchain do? How does it help a bank? How does it help the finance industry?
Yeah, I guess there's always 2 parts to any technology, I think. Is it kind of helping drive sustaining innovation or disruptive innovation? I guess from a bank's perspective, it's about how do we use it to enhance the rails and enhance, I guess, the operations of the bank. So there's a couple of things that we're actively kind of using it for at the moment. Interbank kind of settlement, international remittance kind of thing. So
would that replace something like SWIFT? What would you be using? Why is this technology good? What makes it special? I've heard it's too slow. The transactions are too slow.
Yeah, I guess
what's the issue?
It depends what you're kind of using it for. So if you're looking at high volume kind of retail payments, at the moment I think it's probably too slow. If you're looking at large volume interbank settlement, kind of the speed, the scalability thing is not as big an issue.
So give me an example. What would be what can blockchain handle now? If you're doing a transaction, how fast can it happen? Is it a couple of seconds? Is it minutes?
Yeah, it depends on which blockchain you're using, I guess.
So there's an issue there about the types of blockchains as well, right?
Yeah.
So which ones are you using? Are you using the IBM version?
So for international, like interbank settlement, we've got some stuff happening with Ripple, RippleNet at the moment. So a couple of corridors that we're using.
Why would you choose Ripple? What made it special?
I think it was there was a few kind of advantages, I guess, but it kind of fit the need that we were looking for when we were looking at that kind of interbank settlement. So it kind of hit everything.
So the HKMA is doing a project at the moment, right?
Yeah.
With banks.
So there's a separate kind of use case for us. So it's in trade finance. So looking at...
And that's slow, traditionally very slow. So it's not about
exactly.
speed.
So that's about digitizing, I guess. So 1, it's about digitizing the current process, but 2, also about removing risk around dual financing, multiple kind of financing options. So that initiative, I guess, is looking at connecting or creating a trade finance platform here, connecting to a trade finance platform in Singapore, and connecting it then more broadly into other kind of trade finance platforms as they develop, with a view of removing risk around double financing.
So Zach, we were talking earlier, and you told me you had, is it 1,500 projects that you're on your belt at the moment?
No. So we're both investors and builders. We built an ICO platform called TokenDex. We got about 1,500 projects that have signed up to launch off of the platform.
Okay.
But
these are ICOs, people launching.
These are people launching ICO projects. So we're really more focused on how do we help these companies actually launch a blockchain project and then facilitate the crowdfunding for that. So that's one of our products, right? So this is a semi-autonomous to fully autonomous platform powered by AI and machine learning so that we can help organizations, entrepreneurs around the world exploit the technology.
You're matching the blockchain with the actual ICO. They're doing a coin offering off the back.
Yeah, so these got to be blockchain-powered companies.
Can you see companies that just do blockchain alone? Do you need to kind of marry it with a
No.
with a token?
No, everyone wants to use a token because they want to fund something. Now, the reality is you can use tokens in interesting ways without crowdfunding in order to facilitate and build and grow your network, right? So when we talk about ICOs, everybody knows what an ICO is, initial coin offering. Yeah, it's a crowdfunding campaign. The reality is these should be reframed as customer acquisition exercises. We talked about it earlier, is in order for a blockchain platform to work and sustain and be defendable for the long term is you need users. You need lots of users, you need network effects in order to defend not only the network, but actually create long-term viability of the use.
But then you
of the
have
technology.
private blockchains, though, don't you? Is that not defeat the purpose? So it's smaller group of people. It's
There's trade-offs, right?
yeah.
So private blockchains, work for some organization. So
Yeah.
I'm agnostic. There's those of us in the crypto community that if it's not Bitcoin fully decentralized, which is ironic because it's not because the mining power, but that's another discussion, is if a private blockchain or a decentralized ledger works to solve your business problem, great.
So can
This
you
is
give
Ripple.
me
Ripple's
so can
not
you give me some
blockchain, it's a
examples?
DLC.
Can you give me some examples of like here, the trade finance of people actually using blockchain to solve a problem?
Well, there's lots of problems to be solved, like in trade finance. It's bill of lading, it's receipts, it's warehouse management. There's a whole, if you look at the supply chain continuum.
Sorry, and what was the project you're doing? Sorry? Pindar. Belton Road.
This is Pindar.
I
Everybody
know,
knows
I just
Pindar.
didn't recognize him. Yeah, he's wearing just and the gentleman behind there, what's the project you're doing with blockchain? High performance blockchain that solves what problem? Speed and scalability. Okay. So Juan, you've been hanging out with governments like Dubai and Venezuela and the ambassador of Venezuela. Lucky man. So tell us how you see, cities, governments getting involved in this whole blockchain game.
Well, I mean, you've
What problems are they solving?
Well, you've actually seen two separate examples here. I mean, I just sat down with the people in Venezuela, and it's interesting what they're doing. The whole economy is in shambles. They have hyperinflation, very high unemployment. They have to have an alternative in terms of currency. So they've opted to create a currency tied to crude oil. And it's really something that was an experiment to see if actually it's not replacing the current currency, but it's in addition to the current currency, so it actually hasn't had the impact. So
Sounds a bit like China in the 80s. They had two currencies, right? They had the renminbi and the Waihuijian because they didn't want to affect their internal currency.
So right now they're trying to kind of use another form of currency to stabilize, at least have some form of transactions taking place, because right now we have a very, economy in turmoil, but they're in the process. They haven't raised a full amount of money.
Okay.
So I would say that they're also trying to use the currency to actually facilitate some form of trade and buying and selling of oils. On the complete opposite end, you have Dubai, which has made a mandate, a part of their whole smart city plan to really revolutionize the way they do business, and the whole government will be on, basically the transaction will be on blockchain in 2020, which is a very short period of time, and that they have a number of use cases that they're looking at where, they believe that it's very ideal use case for blockchain, but it's really a overall government plan, probably one that's the most unified in terms of plan to transform everything into blockchain.
Does that mean when they do that, they will reject all the legacy systems? Because most people have a problem of dealing with legacy systems. Like I'm sure Liam has a lot of...
I don't think there's any way you can get rid of legacy systems. I mean, we can talk about a little bit about that in terms of interoperability later, but what they're trying to do is to make a paperless economy, and but you can't really get rid of everything. It's just side by side.
So I haven't forgotten you two. Coming back to you, Liam, just the so in the interoperability, I mean, in banking, there's a lot of technology that comes to you. People are always pitching ideas to you. How do you see blockchain fitting into an overall kind of ecosystem of technologies, right? There's there's APIs, there's cloud technologies. What's going on? How does it fit into that? Or is it really hard to kind of fit into the mix?
No, I don't think it's too hard. So I think everyone's looking at, building a kind of infrastructure API enabled allows you to be able to connect to a whole bunch of different external sources or systems, which is advantageous. And I guess a lot of the stuff that we're looking at or building is with interoperability in mind. So if you take that kind of trade finance platform, the one in Hong Kong is being built on different fabric to the one in Singapore.
And what are those? Can you name? What are the ones?
So the one in Hong Kong is being built in conjunction with Ping An, so it's with a Ping An fabric. But it's basically, it's designed being built with interoperability in mind. So
and the one in Singapore is built.
Good question. I'm not quite sure whether it's Hyperledger or I'm not quite sure.
Not quite sure.
So how many choices are there?
Pindar.
You're not quite sure. Pindar doesn't either.
Yeah.
So it's very confusing. If I'm working on a project now to build tokenized chips, and they're still deciding what blockchain to use. So how do you decide? How do you know? Is it like a blockchain shop you can go to? How do you know what's the right?
Go to Amazon. It's a joke.
I got that.
But
no, because it's confusing, right? How do you know what's the best? Everybody's got their own version of blockchain. Baidu has it, Tencent has it, Oracle has it, IBM has it,
R3, you can name, a bunch of places. I think you need to look at what are the critical things you need your system to do, and who performs against those metrics well, and which ones, I guess, have more robustness around their kind of code base and a bunch of other things like that. I think there's,
So yourself, Adrian, you're helping people look at tokens as a new type of asset, right? And you do a lot of education around this. So maybe you could explain this a little bit, the idea of, because it seems to me that you need that tokenization to make the blockchain kind of build the community, as Zach was saying, right? To have the momentum, to have the energy behind it. So maybe explain a little bit for kind of investor types in this room around what it is as an asset.
So my background is I'm an investor. My company is an investor in cryptocurrencies as an asset class. And I also do a lot of educations around universities and for regulatory organizations. My point is, when we look at cryptocurrencies, I don't like to call it cryptocurrencies. It's because you have naturally understood as comparing to US dollar to Euro dollars. But
so what should we call it?
When we talk about, I usually call it tokens. The reason is because, it naturally has a FX kind of characteristic, at the same time a store of value characteristic, same as gold. So a lot of times when we talk about why it's an asset class, is because we think it's going to be an investment asset that no matter it's a tokenized securities, no matter it's a utility token, that institutions or individuals could invest it to store.
Can you, because I've seen it mature over the last, 6 months into this idea of having something behind it, a security or utility. Maybe you could break that down a little bit to explain the difference.
So utility token, explained by some of the ICOs, is a token to gain access to a platform. So for example, you have a concert ticket, you can gain access to a concert. The difference for utility token is the price of the concert ticket may fluctuate. So regulators come in and say, potentially it could be a securities because there's a price of the token that is depending on others' managerial effort for the price of the token. So put it this way, if you're holding a milkshake is not a token, but if the price of the milkshake is dependable on the managerial effort of the milkshake company, it could also be a securities. So that's why there's a lot of debates around utility versus security token nowadays.
And then to make it even more confusing, you've also mentioned this idea of a reverse ICO. So what is a reverse ICO? Because we've got a few reverse listings here, so I suppose it might be clear to help the reverse ICO.
So my personal interpretations of reverse ICO is established startups or listed companies pursuing ICO for fundraising instead of a share placement. So for instance, if I'm a company, Telegram, done an ICO, I choose to pursue ICO instead of an IPO path for fundraising, but they already has an established business with few billions, with 300 million users globally. You could be companies like Kodak, which on NASDAQ, listed on NASDAQ, they do an ICO instead of doing a share placement for fundraising.
So they see it as an alternative way to raise money.
Yep.
The irony of the Telegram one is it was totally private, right? The users didn't get to participate.
Yeah, then arguably, whether to define ICO, whether it's just a crowd fundraising or you include a private placement, also in terms of ICO. So for me, when I talk about ICO, it's always including the way to raise money through smart contracts.
Yeah.
To me, it's an ICO, no matter it's a private or crowd sales.
So how do you think Hong Kong's going to address this? You're out there talking to the government and various people. How is it going to be addressed?
Well, I think it's a sensitive question for me. I think Hong Kong is at the sweet spot in Asia because geographically we are close to China, we're close to a lot of countries, and we are kind of have a financial hub around Hong Kong. There's a lot of education done by the government, and you can imagine back to 2008, the Lehman Brothers crisis happened, but not enough education was done by the Hong Kong government. So now they're taking an initiative to do a precaution educations on cryptocurrency and ICOs without taking so much stance in what kind of, you see the asset class. Hong Kong MA said it's a commodity a few years ago, but we never know whether the stance will change again.
And John, yourself, we were talking earlier, and you were saying you come from a background of usability in UX, right? I went through the exercise of buying some crypto, downloading various wallets. It was very painful. I had to buy a token off a gift website in the UK. That gift website then sent the money to an exchange. 2 weeks later, I had my money on an exchange. I felt quite illicit. So what's happening? Why is the experience of owning and trading crypto so difficult? And how's that gonna kind of expand into the wider community? I mean, we're already in Hong Kong. It's taken us 3 years to adjust to just payment by mobile phone, right? I mean, so how's that going to change with the whole crypto wallet concept?
So just to give you some context, so I run advisory at Kinetic, and we work with projects to run their token sales, and presumably many of them have a product close to launch or pretty much ready to launch. In fact, that's what we encourage. In some cases, some want to do a token sale way in advance of having a launch, and what we advocate actually is perhaps to raise money other ways, like through equity rounds in advance of that. As it's been said on the panel so far, we agree that token sales are really about driving community more so than fundraising. And so when you're trying to drive community through such a campaign like a token sale, a big part of that is to help your prospective users understand how they can use the utility of that presumably utility token. And so coming from a UX background, my interest is actually in helping projects think about users, user-centered design, what is the user flow in which one might interact with the blockchain, and then ultimately, is this something that everyday users can actually engage with? In some cases, where projects are a bit more B2B, or they're running decentralized networks for, say, computing, for example, even in those cases, how can someone who's participating in a network and contributing services be comfortable using it? So to your point, UX is a huge problem in the blockchain space, largely because it is so technology and feature driven, more so than, say, solution or problem solving driven. So it's something that I think we and a number of other advisory firms are thinking about as we're coaching our clients.
But I mean, I've been building websites for the last 15 years, and the whole UX, the experience I find is it's just painful. It's incredibly painful, right? You had a...
Yeah, so it sucks, right? And so I'm glad we get some design-focused people in the space, but we've got to look at the underlying root problem. Is these blockchains, whether it's Ethereum, Bitcoin, or anybody else, are not meant for real-world mass adoption, right? These are developer-led, elite developer-led communities, right? So unless, I mean, if you want to use a blockchain application, you need to hire blockchain developers, right? It's a pain in the ass, right? So if we look at organizations that are working on protocols that provide for extensibility and usability for the technology itself versus just at the application layer, that's where the win's going to be, I think.
I mean, to your point, it is poor right now, largely because this has been driven by a developer ecosystem, one that has actually thought out really well how to construct blockchains. And so it hasn't necessarily had the moment to think out the UX part of it. I think we as a community need to invite UX and design-centered folks to come in and work on these projects. And I think it's a great opportunity that we have right now.
But most internet technologies started off very user unfriendly, right? I mean,
Absolutely,
it wasn't until a web browser came along that we could all use the web. It wasn't until iPhone came up with this that we could use them.
This is a natural step in the evolution of our space. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying that it's something we need to do if we want to invite more mainstream users to use these applications. I would like to think that one day we won't even really be talking about whether it's blockchain or not, but rather they're just applications that use blockchain on the back end.
So then don't we have to address the design limitations of existing chains in terms of scalability, governance, monetary policy, so that the rest of the world can actually use it versus this kind of
so could you just outline some of those limits? Because I know there are some there are some limits, right? I know there's various people trying to tackle the size of a block, right, to make it store more data. There's various people trying to tackle the speed, like your man Zap over there. What is the nirvana that we're all trying to get to? Is there a particular number?
Well, just to be fair, just to speak to your point, this is much like debating the value between Informix and Oracle back in the day. The mainstream user doesn't care. It needs to be addressed, but it's not a UX problem. That's a technology problem. So we do have technology problems to solve today. I think there's a parallel universe of UX problems that we can solve that will bring in users, I think.
So, Juan, going to you, you deal with the banking industry. What I'm amazed is how come the big guys like Google, Facebook, Tencent, Baidu, how come the big guys who have truckloads of programmers and developers and truckloads of UX people, how come none of them have launched any products based on blockchain so far that I'm aware of?
I don't think they haven't launched. I think they're in the process of creating many blockchain solutions.
Can you give some examples of things that they're doing?
I think many of them are just in the larger planning phases. But I would say that over the next 6 months to a year, we'll see quite a number. And I think one of the things you have to understand is blockchain is being used by many large organizations, but in certain small pieces of it. So I had a...
So they're testing it. It's all proof of concept.
Well, I mean, I had a conversation with the guys at Square, and they said, we've been using blockchain for a long time, but it's not necessarily over the whole platform. So you see many of the large organizations, it's just that as a percentage of the overall kind of product profile, it doesn't seem to be predominant yet. But, over time, that will increase dramatically.
But why then don't we have enterprise? I mean, we've been talking about this for years. Why don't we have mass enterprise deployments in the space so far? So what are the actual limitations that are keeping an enterprise from saying, I'm doing an enterprise deployment of X, Y, or Z?
I think it's because enterprises are starting new subsidiaries that are arm's length away from their brands. They have an existing brand that they need to protect, and so they're doing much more experimental work outside of the enterprise. And I think we will start to see some internal adoption based on how those experiments work without it affecting their brands. We are actually seeing them, but they're very kind of...
Is that what you're doing, Liam? Is it very arm's length? Are you in a different part of the building?
No. So we're kind of in the building. But we do, I mean, there are things that you do separately in a kind of proof of concept kind of structure, I guess. If it's at risk or if it's a critical kind of flow, business process, you can't risk it. But there are elements that we're doing now, kind of at scale in implementation. But I think to that point, one of the things that happens a lot, I would say probably 80–90% of the problems that people are solving with blockchain are generally better solved just with a traditional database. And as a result, I think that's one of the things people are looking at. I think people use blockchain as an excuse to digitize an old process. Great.
So it's just the name. They gather people under the...
Yeah, people get excited. They're like, oh, cool, this is on blockchain. Awesome, let's go. Could have been done 20 years ago with a database if someone cared. But I think that's kind of interesting. And I think that's one of the things people look at it and they go, well, if we use blockchain for this, it's going, we'll have higher kind of storage costs. We'll have lower kind of transaction rates, other things like that. Do we just use a database for this kind of thing? But
so Adrian, I went to a conference the other day, the Wall Street Journal. They gave out, this was the Wall Street Journal coin. It's going up in price as I hold it. Where's yours pinned?
It looks like a Greek coin.
It does, yeah. It's made out of plastic, so it's not as... tell us a bit about the excitement. Why is there so much excitement behind crypto? And is it just in the media? Or, I mean, do you have friends who drive around in Lamborghinis and hang around with Zach? Is this,
I
you know, Hong Kong
I drive
is
a
a
Hyundai.
Hong Kong is very, you know, people want money fast, right? If it's not in property, it's in finance. If it's not in finance, it's in crypto. So tell us what's going on in that space. You know, is it, I mean, it seems to me blockchain by itself is a little bit dull because it's basically just another programming language or another protocol, right?
Well,
you know, it's another database. But when you add in the spice of crypto, it suddenly becomes, you know, a sports car as opposed to a truck.
I personally hope I have a Lamborghini, but
You don't have one.
I don't have one. But
Get off the panel, please.
but I think there are a few points why crypto is so exciting now, and especially around Asia. The first one, and on a global basis, when we look at Bitcoin 2008, is actually a social experiment to test out kind of democracy, kind of the anti-government and banks sentiment. And that has flows around a lot of people.
So was the internet, wasn't it, when it first started?
It was started before 2008, but the white paper were actually released 2 weeks after Lehman Brothers collapse. So there's
but
a lot
all
of
money's in Asia, right? It's the Koreans, it's the Japanese, it's the Chinese who are backing most of this.
yeah.
Whenever there's a clampdown, all the coin prices collapse, right?
Well, I think there's kind of also the short-term trading sentiment in Asia. So when I talk to projects or investors in US, they kind of look at the horizons of 5 to 10 years for a lot of projects. But in Asia, investors traditionally look for 1 to 2 years quick return. And crypto asset class, with the liquidity, with the access getting more mainstream, is common for institutions to get a quick grasp on investing in cryptos and to get. We compare pre-IPO funds to ICO funds, and pre-IPOs usually lock you for 5 to 8 years. But
So you're saying it gives liquidity to an entrepreneur?
Liquidity to entrepreneur and also investor. So
and the investor?
Yeah, and
before you go public. So you're saying it's another way that you can come in and fill the gap. Zach sounds like he wants to say something. It's another way of filling in the gap of monetizing the time you've used to build a business. Is that what you're saying?
You could say that. So for investor,
crystallizing your investment, I think is.
If I'm an entrepreneur, I'm raising a round A investment. I may spend months to do that, lobbying investor coming to round A, get out an IPO. It may take 4 years for an investor. But now, if I'm doing in my Telegram doing an ICO, maximum and lockdown is 18 months.
How much money did Telegram raise?
I don't know, 1.2 billion.
1.2 billion?
Yeah.
On what promise? What are they going to do with it?
So they're kind of building a new protocol, respective to the messaging industry. But so far, no product is built. I couldn't comment on the white paper as well, but person haven't invested.
So John, yourself, if there's a few entrepreneurs in this room. If I was in Hong Kong and I have a business, it's doing well, it's 3 years old, I've done my first angel seed round, I'm looking for 1 or 2 million or maybe 5 million. Would you recommend that they do an ICO as an alternative to going to a VC fund and saying, look, I'll give you 25% of my company for $5 million US?
I mean, to be fair, I'm really more interested in what is the business model. So
do you have to have a business model? I thought an ICO doesn't need one.
Yeah, so I don't know those projects.
You don't know those projects?
No.
So how do you do because you mentioned earlier you do due diligence. How do you define, because what I've seen is ICOs basically are marketing, right? They have some fantastic people on the board. They've got a timer to make you feel nervous about the opportunity. They've got a Telegram, to get you kind of involved and anti-spammed. So, what are the deciding factors? If I wanted to pitch to you, how would you decide whether, I'm the right kind of ICO? Well, what do I need? Give me 5 things that I need to be a good, to pass your due diligence.
Sure. So by way of example, we are looking at projects that are doing data marketplaces, for example, right? So to be a marketplace, you have a buy side and a sell side, right? So you need to drive adoption of people who are providing data that they wish to sell, with full consent and privacy controls. And so you have to be able to drive that adoption. So for me, if I look at a model like a marketplace model, I want to know what is the utility of being a part of this marketplace? What kind of data are you sharing as a sell side? And then who's going to buy it? Who's going to use it or market it? And so ultimately, in this blockchain ecosystem, who are the stakeholders? And how is that token a method of either transferring value as a medium of exchange or a store of value, say if there's a staking model, to incentivize behaviors or disincentivize bad behaviors. So I actually start with that. I don't really care what money you think you need to raise. I don't.
So it's
really,
about the behavior.
It's about what is the ecosystem you're trying to build, and what is the business model built around it. And if I can answer those questions, and I can understand why a blockchain should be used, or a decentralized system should be used, doesn't have to be a blockchain, then we can ask, why does this need a token? And if we can answer why there needs to be a token, then we can talk about why you should do a token sale at all. If we can't answer those questions, then I would say raise a round, build your business, use a centralized database, be efficient, and go about traditional methods. You don't need to do an ICO. And the reason I say this, and even though this may be contrarian to the ICO craze that we live in today, is that at Kinetic, at least, we're very interested in projects that want to build decentralized ecosystems, or at least ecosystems that can use blockchain, even if it's purely for efficient systems integration. Okay, there are projects that are like that. That's fine.
So can you give us an example of somebody who passed your due diligence?
Yeah. So one project that we were actually talking about before we started the panel is SharesPost. SharesPost is a U.S.-based firm in San Francisco, and they're launching a project called the Glass Network, which is a decentralized compliance and settlement network for exchanges to settle transactions, basically by sharing compliance with one another. Not every
traditional exchanges or crypto
crypto exchanges. So not every crypto exchange can have licensing in the U.S. or in every jurisdiction where they would like to settle transactions. This is a perfect example of using blockchain, where these different exchanges who can't necessarily share all of their data with one another can provide compliance to one another, and perhaps make it possible for tokenized securities to not only be traded, but to have some measure of liquidity. And so when we went through the model, we said, this makes sense. This is a good
So pass. How about you, Zach? You sound a bit more strict, or less strict, maybe.
Well,
how do you decide?
I totally agree with what John's saying. At the end of the day, do you have a product that people want to buy, right? I mean, that's just the simple thing. It's just business 101 fundamentals, right? Building something that's important, solving a problem we're solving, and people are willing to pay for it. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? Going back to your original question a few minutes back, is why the crypto craze, right? It's money. It's pure fundamental human greed and institutional greed as people get into the space to make a shit ton of money, right? That's it, right? The underlying stuff I think is important and will vet itself out over the course of the next couple of years, but this is money. And the crypto craze and the rise of Bitcoin to $18,000 in December, 20,000, whatever it was, it's just pure speculative greed, right? That's what this is all about.
I can understand that for the first wave, but what I see, there's various Telegram groups and people I know who started businesses, and they seem to have a genuine purpose that's maybe slightly, money plus something, right? I mean, there's a guy I know, Exprudential, launched a credit card, but it's using the tokens as a way to kind of create a kind of parallel universe of loyalty, of community. I think John's point earlier.
But you need blockchain for that, though.
Sorry?
I mean, there's a ton of loyalty programs.
Asia Miles, right?
What?
Asia Miles.
Yeah.
Linked to your credit
it's
card.
Like, so again, just from our perspective, having looked at 1,500 projects and all of their data, like 90% of them, are money grab scams or just incompetence relative to needing blockchain. 10% are interesting for a variety of reasons, right? And I think this is pretty standard in the ecosystem today. The toilet flushed last year, right? It's all working itself out now, and we're going to see higher quality.
So you mentioned money, but what was interesting earlier, we were talking that there seems to be two grades of market in the crypto world, right? There's what happens in these public exchanges and what happens in over-the-counter trading, where large institutions are actually buying and selling huge wads of token from each other, right? John mentioned this earlier, and maybe you could talk about it a bit, Adrian, but the idea that there's institutions who don't want to be in the public arena, but they are buying and selling crypto from each other. So what's driving them? Is it purely money? Why are they getting involved in crypto as an institution-to-institution kind of trade? Do they see it as hedging? What do they see it as?
Well, I think, and back to your point is, a lot of investment in crypto is based on the grid, but also I think there's kind of when
What do you mean, sorry, based on the grid?
Based on money, based on the desire on more money.
Greed.
Greed. But then when you're back to 2000, the internet age, people invest in internet startups as well and boost up a lot of valuation. It's not purely based on grid. It's based on the idea of having a new kind of revolutions. Same in crypto industries. How much proportion is allocated to grid? I don't know. But still, when our firm invests in certain kind of ICOs, we accept a lockup for 2 years maximum for an ICO, and it's not purely based on the amount of money we want to flip. So I think different institutions.
It's not pump and dump.
Yeah, I think different institutions have a different point of view on that. I know Kinetic has a investment in equity for some of the blockchain companies with a synergies. So I think different people have different point of views on that. Back to the questions on institutions, investment. Well, if investment banks are going to get into this space, it's purely based on profit-driven of models, right? Because banks want to invest in companies or products which is benefiting their LPs. So we have different opinions as an investment manager versus an investment bank.
And Juan, you run blockchain communities all over the world. Are you seeing the people turning up to these events? Are they there because they're hungry for cash? Or what would you see? What's the kind of conversation? When they've had a few drinks, is it how much have you made?
Well, I mean, the community is largely not filled with crypto investors. They're largely filled with people who are wanting to get inside the blockchain space, and then also those who are wanting to raise money. But I think I want to address another point, because I think there was a very important point that was made, which is building community. First of all, when I see a white paper and I read a white paper in any marketplace, I've built marketplaces, and I've never met one person that knows how to build a marketplace that hasn't built one already and can write anyone can write a white paper. A marketplace is extraordinarily hard to create. And I think
you need to bring buyers and sellers to that.
Well, the simplest thing is the hardest thing to execute in a marketplace. Generally, there's so much tweaking from the original idea versus the actual marketplace or any community. So I would say that largely all of these projects, when they actually go to the post-ICO phase and they're building out, there's going to be a tremendous amount of failure. I think there's money solve problems, which I think those are the kinds of things of getting the technology people involved, building out platforms, and there's no amount of money in the world can solve, which is building community. And I think that's going to be the largest problem with a lot of these ICO projects.
You're saying that those communities fail once they've done the fundraise?
Yes, because it's just so hard to build community.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got 5 minutes left. Let's take some questions from the floor. Do we have any questions? Pinder? No?
I agree with that last statement.
Thank you, Pinder.
He agrees with you. Okay, at the back.
Yeah, I know this isn't necessarily a Bitcoin talk, but the past few days, Bitcoin has been like on Bloomberg saying, the end of Bitcoin, the price is 6,000, it's all now it's all negative. Is this kind of a good contrarian? It's interesting me, whenever the headlines are really negative, to me it gets interesting. I'm just curious what you guys feel about the current state.
My personal view is, I think there were over 100 times of media saying that Bitcoin will die over the past 2 years. That's the first point. The second point is my personal opinion on centralized media indirectly or directly manipulating some of the crypto price is a concern to me, because say, for example, in January when one of the medias say that Korea is banning cryptocurrencies officially, that was a false news, which pushed the market down Bitcoin for $2,000 and 22% in one day. So my view is...
There was also some official news about Ethereum recently that the SEC is going to assess whether it's a security token or not, right? But it was fake news. So where do you go? If you're investing in crypto, where do you go to get trusted source of information about the company you're investing in? Where do you go? There's nowhere to go.
So just to be fair, if you're looking for a quick hit, I don't know where to tell you. Honestly, I'm not. Yeah. That's not what we do here. If you're looking to support projects that have good fundamentals around the technology, and you wish to learn about the tech and look in their GitHub and see their commits and see what they're actually building and see what type of people are actually in their community and whether they are developers who are building on top of these platforms or working too, I think that's how you get into projects that may be publicly traded that you want to support longer term. So if I may, I know we've used the word greed a lot. I have a problem with short-term greed, but I don't have a problem with long-term greed. If you want to support projects that are genuinely trying to provide a product and a service, then I think there are a lot of opportunities. Yeah. But don't get me wrong, you really have to dig, because there's a lot of fluff in these white papers. There's a lot of fluff in the marketing, as you said, Napoleon. And so you have to do your due diligence, and even more than perhaps you can do in the traditional space.
But what I find fascinating is I'm kind of answering your question. My question is there is an ecosystem of research building up around the crypto, right? I mean, I listen to a couple of podcasts. There's a bad crypto podcast. Some of them are a bit dodgy, but do you see the traditional research houses kind of extending and opening up research arms and analysts looking at the underlying, the fundamentals, if there are any, or the emotions behind it? Do you see this? Is there an ecosystem behind that? Is it coming from, the investor VC firms? Is it coming from the Zacks? Where is it coming? Because I'm sure Zach, do you have a blog?
Yeah, blockchainreview.io. It's one of the most widely read blogs. It's chain agnostic, crypto agnostic. So to your point on technical research and analysis, yeah. So a lot of the research firms are coming to firms like ours, and I'm sure probably to Kinetic and others to better understand what's actually happening in the space, what's real, what's not, and how do you apply quantified analysis to the limited availability of data that we have, right? And this is not widespread. It's institution by institution for their own specific needs.
But the thing that worries me is a lot of these current, like Cointelegraph and all these news, they may not be centralized, but they're basically charging you to write about your next ICO. So they seem very, very biased. So where does a punter go apart from blockchain.io or Kinetic?
Well,
where do you go? Where do you find
the Consumer Reports, right? So those of you may not know Consumer Reports, but you got to look at most of these media properties are owned by companies that have to control the message relative to their ecosystem. So is there widespread manipulation both in the crypto space in terms of media as well as in mainstream media? Absolutely. Like it happens. It's happening every single day. This is the truth. Yeah. So where do you go?
And Adrian, do you see this happening within the Chinese media? Do you see a kind of repetition of who owns the media affecting the way that it's talked about?
Well, I couldn't comment on that on a specifically Chinese media, but I think in the Chinese community, they have a strong bond among the funds, among the medias, among the companies themselves, and we call it a very stringent and community in the crypto space. I think I see there's pros and cons on that front, but I think the bottom line for this discussion is as an individual, as an investor, in project or whatever cryptocurrencies, you have to be directly connected to the foundation you are investing in the project that you're investing in. And for retail investors, a lot of times they are kind of scammed. It's because they just listen to medias. They just read the Cointelegraph, such kind of, any kind of medias, but without analyzing themselves on the company's financials, on the company token economics. And I'll advise everyone to do the same thing.
Okay, well, we have time for one more question. Is there another question? No? All right, guys. Maybe we'll just say 3 things that you would give somebody advice about getting involved in blockchain. Just 3 words you'd associate. If I came to you, I said, look, I'm thinking about doing something with blockchain. What should I think about? Maybe start with you, Liam.
I think making sure you're actually solving a real problem. I mean, we talked about that.
Solve a real problem.
Solve a real problem. Make sure the problem that you're solving requires blockchain.
Okay, make sure it requires blockchain.
I think for me, I'd think also about the customers. Who is the customer that's actually going to use this? And
shouldn't that be the first one?
So I think one is the problem. Are you solving a problem for the customer?
Who's the customer? What's the problem? And do you need blockchain?
Yeah.
John.
Yeah, so just to extend that, I would say, who are the stakeholders? So that includes users and customers, but also includes partners, other service providers, and validators in your network. Who are all the members of that ecosystem, and how can they contribute?
Okay.
Mine are quite interesting. So the first one is, I think, so blockchain is nothing fancy. It's just a distributed ledger. So it's to record transactions. It's not a new kind of internet. Second point is...
it's not a new internet.
Yeah, you have to think
Can you say that to Cointelegraph and all these other people like that? It's not a new internet, okay?
Well, could be a headline. So the second point is...
Adrian says it's not a new internet. Got that?
Blockchain,
tweet.
So think about a problem you're trying to solve. The third one is, I personally think that nothing is non-hackable. sometime in the future it could be hackable. So don't think immutability is always a long-term thing for blockchain.
So it's hackable, therefore it's not immutable. Okay.
I think at some point.
At some point. Juwon.
3 words, open a wallet. That's the best way you're going to ever learn.
A wallet. Which one?
Pick your own, but
Give me a hint. Come on.
go on Coinbase.
You can't if you're not American. I've tried.
Then become American.
Nowadays, are you joking? Zach?
Don't involve yourself in blockchain and ICOs. Save yourself the heartache, unless, like everybody has said, you have a very specific problem. The only way it can be solved is by utilizing the technology. Otherwise, don't. Just it's not worth it. I mean, that's the reality.
Oh, we have a question.
Just get opinion from the panel. Any opinion on the EOS mainnet and its ability to process, millions of transactions a second? It's just launching, obviously.
Can we take that offline? Because I've just been told we run out of time. Unless you've got a very pithy answer. Nobody?
Who?
Pithy, short answer. Oh,
No.
Who is the US mainnet? EOS mainnet. Oh, EOS. Yeah, that's all happening. Ether, EOS. Maybe you can have a chat about. There's a little room around the corner there that you can gather and EOS it up. Okay. So can we have a round of applause for our panel? They did very well. Thank you.